Hello everyone, welcome to Kings Talk presented by Capture the Crown. This is Tony. With me as always, we've got John. Well, it's been 3 games since we've last spoken. The Kings had a chance to win 3 straight. We did take a stab at what the Kings would go in those 3 games. John and I both... John went 2-1. I went 3-0. They should have gone 3-0. But they did go 2-1. John, give yourself a pat on the back for guessing that 2-1. Even though I'm just going to say it now, you didn't guess the games that they were going to lose correctly.
That's exactly why I opted not to pat myself on the back. Because I did not get the games correct. So I was not correct at all. In fact, you were more right than I was, because I was wrong about 2 games.
You're a fraud.
And you were only wrong about 1.
I was only wrong about the Rockets, who... Well, that's a discussion for maybe later in the podcast. But, John, how's it going, man? It's daylight savings. It's starting to feel like spring, or I guess, yeah, it's still starting to feel like spring in California. How you doing? How's it going?
I don't know. We find ourselves here yet again, almost with the same exact feeling we have every week, which is just, we almost came into this podcast talking about a great win and focusing on a stretch of games that was in the positive. But we just find ourselves talking about something that just should not have happened. And it almost happened in 2 games, right? With the Spurs and Houston. Though they won the Spurs game, that one went... Mm-hmm. It required a 7-0 run. Fox fouled out. They were lucky to win that in a lot of ways. And then the Houston game, they got swept in their season series to Houston. And it's just, it's the same old thing, isn't it?
Dude, I know. That's a good point. They did get swept in their season series against Houston because, of course, they lost those 2 games back in, I want to say November. It was back-to-back games in Houston. I'm just numb to it now. Maybe I don't know, Sunday matinee games are always kind of hard to get into already. 3 o'clock on a Sunday. So watching the loss, I don't know, maybe subjectively it was a little easier. It's whatever. I don't really care. Barely even wanted to turn this on. I'm already tired from losing that hour of sleep. I'm just, But then on top of everything, it's like I said, I'm just kind of numb to the pain of them losing games, especially at home, that they should be losing. I mean, in the stretch of a couple weeks now, they've lost to a depleted Miami team at home. Who else did they lose to at home not too long ago?
They lost to Chicago.
Chicago, yeah, of course. Last Monday, they lose to Chicago at home. And then, I mean, that's just recently. They've lost to the Pistons at home. They lost to the Hornets at home. Did they lose to the Trailblazers at home, or was that on the road?
I kind of think that was in Portland.
I think it was in Portland as well. But it's just I'm just used to it now. I'm happy at least they, since we last spoke, they've won 2 out of the 3. But I'm coming to terms with the fact that this team is either going to be a play-in team or a first-round exit in the playoffs. Because that's just the way they play. Just far too inconsistent. It's, like I said, it's just not even surprising anymore. It shouldn't have been surprising even a month ago. But now it's just I really don't care. They lost to the Rockets. Great. I'm starting to accept it. I'm in that stage of my, what do they call it? Grief with the Kings. I've just accepted it. So
they are who they are. But you know what? It's one of those things where people keep talking about the up and down nature of the season. They lose these games, but people are also pointing out, optimistically so, and rightfully so, they've won some big games. They beat the Clippers, they beat Minnesota, they beat LA last week, or the Lakers rather. They've had a couple of big wins, obviously, but I think just these last couple of games, maybe since the All-Star break, really, and there have been 2 things that I just kind of feel point to, or maybe just solidify the argument that this team's not going to go very deep in the playoffs, that they still have a lot of learning to do. And I think one of them is just kind of talking about what they're doing at home. I mean, first of all, their placement in the West is really contingent on playing well at home, because 12 of their final 19 games are at the Golden One Center. And, they have the 16th best win percentage at home this season in the league. So, it's not the worst, but it could be better. But they have lost a lot of games, as you noted, the Miami game, Miami without a bunch of good players, the Chicago game. They've made things close against the Spurs, a young Spurs team, and they lost to Houston. And I think one of the things that you've seen in all those games is that there's been a failure to implement the game plan. And in it's such a way that seems to permeate the team's performances at home. I mean, against San Antonio, though they won those games, they let a young team get confident. Against Chicago and against Houston, which are two very good interior defensive teams, they got too deep into the paint, didn't get off the ball, didn't pass, didn't spray it out for threes. Thus, there were a lot of turnovers. And against Miami, their three-point defense, which has been an issue all season, really kind of was the biggest issue there. And so there's a lot of failure to implement like strategy. And before I get to my second point, like, don't you see that a lot? Like, it just seems like you kind of see Mike Brown come into the post-game press conference. It's like, yeah, we drilled that. Like, in terms of not getting too deep into the paint and preventing turnovers. He said that after the Houston game. He's like, we drilled that. We talked about it a ton, and yet they still did it. And they've done that before.
I agree.
And I just also, I guess, off the Houston game as well, one of the big reasons that the Kings lost to the Rockets the other night was because of Sabonis' 9 turnovers, which is that's a horrible game in terms of ball security.
More turnovers than assists.
Yeah, which you never see. A horrible game. And after the game, Sabonis talked about it, and he was like, yeah, Houston's a really physical team. It's what you see in the playoffs. They cover passing lanes well. They blow up DHOs. And it's just kind of a reminder, because what does that kind of sound like? That sounds like a lot of the things the Warriors did. They were physical. They've been to the playoffs before. They knew how to apply that physicality in that setting. They blew up DHOs. They were really good against Sabonis and bothering Sabonis. And you saw that against Houston. And Houston does that well. Despite being a young team, they at least do that well. And they're a very strong interior defense, and they can swarm you. And we didn't see the greatest game from him. And it just kind of makes me wonder what's going to happen in the playoffs. Sabonis is so dominant, 46 straight double-doubles, leads the league in triple-doubles. So very good. He's one of my favorite players to watch, and he's making a historic imprint on the game. But what's going to happen in the biggest moments? Is this something to be concerned about, or is it something that you think you're going to be seeing a lot of growth between last year and this year? Or is it going to be a process, something in between?
That's a good question. It's something I haven't really thought about. I mean, I did notice his high turnover against the Rockets on Sunday. But I didn't really think about it until you brought it up. So, I mean, no, I don't have any answer. I have my hopes and dreams, and I hope he does learn from it. It's not an issue coming to the playoffs. But, looking at it, it could definitely well be another one, a problem again. I also think, personally, I always hate throwing out this card. I think the Rockets game was a little one-sided, being reffed a little. I feel like the Rockets were getting a lot of calls and the Kings weren't. I think a few of those turnovers led to that from Sabonis. And in the playoffs again, to go against what I just said. I guess they are a little more toughly reffed, and things they let him play a little harder, I guess. But I don't think all those turnovers were his fault. I don't know. I hope not. I hope he can learn. He had that. I mean, isn't that why we wanted to play the Warriors last year? That was like the big thing. It's like, you know what? If you want to play anyone and lose to anyone and learn from someone, it's going to be the Warriors, the 4-time champs. Maybe it was a good reminder too, that Rockets game, and maybe you can prepare for it a little more when the postseason comes around.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned, but there's also reason to be optimistic. And there's other things that Sabonis can do to maybe not have to force himself into those positions, yet still be on the floor, or at least do things to stay on the floor. One of the things that I keep talking about this season is his defense, and I think his pick and roll defense, I pointed it out last week. Another week later, it's still looking pretty good, in my opinion. At least the best it's looked in his tenure as a King, and it seems to be on an upward trajectory. And his defense overall, he seems very nimble. I mean, the steal against the Spurs, I feel like he's had 3 or 4 steals just like that over the last week or two. So I think he had one like against the Clippers. He might have had one against a couple of other moments, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But he's done very well there. One of the things that I'd like to see him do, and I think that everybody would like to see him do a little bit better, is kind of get back into a 3-point rhythm. I think over his last 11 games, he's shooting 30% from the 3-point line. So which is down 10 percentage points. So from essentially his season average, but I think it'll be interesting. So I think he's going to put himself in a position to really learn and grow a lot. And I mean, we said it even last year, and you're right about the Warriors thing. We were talking about how beneficial that can be. It's a learning experience, and sometimes it's more about year 3 than anything. I mean, talking about the Warriors' own experience, not to just get into the completely different franchise, because everybody has their own situation, their own journey and culture and everything like that. But it was their 3rd year where they really became that championship team, quite literally. So, it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Sabonis, but it's a narrative to keep an eye on, especially after that Houston game. But like you said earlier in the podcast, those matinee games, especially on a Sunday, are kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't really like those. I hate watching them.
I hate them too. I really do. But a little kind of conversation, not to take it too much away from what you're talking about, but I did make a post about this, and it's not the first time it's been brought up. Going back to the Kings not playing very well at home, it's brought some boos out from the fans. I personally think rightfully so. Games like the Spurs, where they blow big leads and barely win it. Games like the Rockets, the Pistons, the Hornets, the Bulls, the Heat, where you lose at home in games you should be winning. Monk has noted on several occasions now that he doesn't like being booed. I'll ask how you feel in a second, but just kind of asking myself that, like, about, I don't know, I haven't really liked Monk's responses to being booed. Like, he's like, I just don't like it, I don't appreciate it. But it's like, it kind of like takes away, like, for me, it's like, man, this team just have no fire in them. Like, I would want them to get it. I would want them boos to like motivate them, and maybe it is, and maybe, I mean, of course, no one likes being booed, and no one's gonna be like, yeah, just keep booing us, it's fine. But it just comes off as like kind of weak to me, because it's like they're not being booed for no reason. They know this. How do you feel about the fans booing the Kings and the like specifically Malik Monk's response to being booed?
The fans are entitled to express whatever feelings they want to express. And that even goes for the Boston fans, for all the people out in Boston. Yeah. Whatever they're saying out there. But yeah, that's just the way I'll put it in the shortest terms. Malik Monk is the third best player on this team, in my opinion. And I think his importance to the locker room, his importance to the team performance in so many different ways, both on and off the floor, are critical. And what those comments have kind of made me realize is, maybe we've been a little too hard on Fox and Sabonis in terms of leadership. Because if you're talking about somebody that embodies, and now Fox kind of does this too, so like I'm not excusing him 100%, but if you're going to embody the kind of complacency, the lack of urgency at certain moments that seems to plague this team, it's Malik Monk. When you think about these comments, that just seems like no one can tell me what to do. I don't worry, I got this kind of thing. And it just doesn't seem like a championship attitude. Mm-hmm. And that can obviously change. And maybe that was already clear through the team's performance throughout this season, really. But that just seems to embody that, doesn't it? Don't you think that seems he seems almost responsible, not entirely, but to a significant degree, for this characteristic that is a malady for the team?
He is responsible for that. I mean, he's a leader in the locker room. He seems like one of the more vocal guys on the team as well. I don't know. He's got to be better about it. I don't know if I'm answering your question, like totally, like if I'm answering it completely. But
well, let me put it this way: we view Malik Monk, like just the way he is, as a very positive person to have around a locker room, and I think that's true. But as one of the most prominent players on the team, you because we've been giving a lot of flack to De'Aaron Fox about this, that his behavior and demeanor can kind of drip downwards throughout the team, and they can kind of all assume that, or at least to some degree. Malik Monk is somewhat responsible for that as well. Do you think that we should look at some of those characteristics that we think of as positive as actually kind of negative? Is he too carefree? Is he too unserious about things? I mean, like, these are all complaints we've kind of made about Fox.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, he does seem too carefree. I remember earlier this season when Mike Brown, he's like, I'm about to lose my top, Monk, if you do that again or something. He gets a little more leeway than Fox because he's not the best player. Fox obviously has a little more responsibility when it comes to leadership, but, I mean, Monk doesn't just get away scot-free. I mean, he is one of the better players. He is sometimes the best player on the floor for the Kings, especially late in games this season. I mean, I think it 100% does fall on him, and his attitude, it does affect the rest of the team. And I think that's, again, why I didn't really like his response to being booed. It was like, I just don't like it. Like, you probably don't like it, but I mean,
they're booing, and he says, well, they started to boo, so I took matters in my own hand. And, he hits that shot to tie the game against San Antonio or whatever. It's like, did you need the booing to do that?
That's
like,
true.
You're just proving the opposite at this point. I love Malik Monk. I think he's a terrific player. He seems like a good dude. But I think that there's a little bit of need to grow in some area that revolves around that. Because I think it affects the team. I think I think he's an infectious personality. And therefore, I think that his carefree demeanor might be such that it kind of is somewhat responsible for the lack of urgency at times from this team. It'd be interesting to see if that affects whether or not they pay him probably the money that he's worth, this offseason. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
It'll be interesting. I'll give it to Monk's credit, at least. He's one of the guys I see out there, regardless if he's on or off. I feel like he does play with intensity most of the time, where it's like, that's a question we always bring up with Fox, is like, he just doesn't really seem into it at times. I'll give it to Monk at least. He always kind of seems into the game when he's in the game. He always plays with an intensity. So I'll give him that.
That's true. I mean, even at the end of that Houston game, he came up with that interception on a 3/4 court pass.
Yeah. Down by 8 with
So that proves your point. I totally agree. So it's not a complete, it's just I guess more or less, it's not so much a complaint about Monk. It's just I guess it's not, you can't just look at everything through rose-colored glasses with him.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Because you can't do that with this team at all.
Yeah. Far from it, unfortunately.
But I guess kind of interesting off of that idea, let's say Monk goes somewhere else this offseason, which is a possibility. Don't you think a guy like Keon Ellis and Davion Mitchell might be names that become more prominent? Or are they already prominent because of their play recently already?
We talked about this last week, and I was a little more hesitant to answer. But man, after these last 3 games, Davion Mitchell's looked like a totally different player. A good jump shooter. I mean, his defense is still there, but I mean, he's not a liability on the offensive end anymore. It seems like, at least, I don't want to say anymore, but at least recently he hasn't been, which is the biggest downside to Mitchell. He's been great. Keon Ellis has been great as well. I don't know. I don't know if it takes away from Monk, from trying to re-sign Monk, because Monk is still clearly a much better player, and Mitchell has a lot more than 5 games to show that he's a consistent deep threat in this league. But I mean, just looking at the positive with those 2 guys right now, they're just playing so great. And I mean, they're taking Duarte and Herter's minutes down late and in close games. It's nice to see, honestly, because they're 2 defensive guys you want in there, and they've been shooting the 3 super well. I mean, what else do you want? Maybe a little more size for Mitchell, but I mean,
he's playing big. I mean, when you're playing good offense and you're being a ball pressure guy, which they're both doing. They can take turns at it. They can be out there together. They can stagger them. They're just terrific. And it keeps Fox from having to do that. And they can do it consistently, make that their calling card. And since the All-Star break, Davion Mitchell's shooting 50% from 3. Keon Ellis is shooting 40% from 3. And I mean, 3-and-D is the thing you say. And I mean, length and size is big, but these guys are what you want in a guard rotation. And if they can keep it up, I think Keon Ellis definitely seems to be on an upward trajectory. Davion Mitchell's a little bit of a question mark, but this seems like the best stretch of games in the Mike Brown tenure of Davion Mitchell, easily. And it's been a while too. I mean, he's been playing really well. It's not even just since the All-Star break. It was before the All-Star break he was playing really well. It seemed like really ever since he got his position back, which was kind of in late January, if I'm not mistaken. He's been really, really good. And I think since over the last month, since that OKC game in early to mid-February where he went 4-4 from 3, he's shooting 57.1% from 3. So
he just went 4 for 4 from 3 again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the Lakers.
The Lakers. Yeah. 1 of 2 against San Antonio, 2 of 5 against Houston. He's been particularly good lately. Katie Christensen was saying he's getting into his shot form in a more fluid fashion. And it's a question mark. You don't know if he can keep that up, but basketball's a game of rhythm. We've talked about how much I think we might have mentioned it a few weeks ago, that how much is his 3-point struggles for a guy that did shoot, if I'm not mistaken, in his last year at Baylor, around 40% from 3. How much did that have to do from just sporadic minutes? Because if you remember the late stretch in his rookie season, Fox was hurt. There was no Halliburton there. He's running the guard spot. And I think even Sabonis missed the last 10 games or last 5 games, one of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And Mitchell's like the guy. He's in full rhythm, and he shot well from 3. I think he shot maybe 36, 37%, and maybe even 38. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I feel like I always over-exaggerate, so I was being conservative there. But it's sometimes about just having that rhythm, and the word confidence gets thrown around. He knows he's going to be out there. He knows what his job is a little bit better. He's being far more aggressive, and he's just got confidence in a rhythm, and that seems to just be the key for him. That might have just been the thing that was missing over the last 2 years when you talk about having 2 more playmakers separating you and Fox, basically, with Monk and Sabonis, and you're getting less minutes, and you're all of a sudden just this defensive guy, and you sometimes don't know what to do, and then all of a sudden you're losing a role. It seemed like confidence and rhythm was something that just evaded him for the most part since Mike Brown's been here, since Sabonis has been here, maybe even. So this stretch of games over the last month plus has just been terrific. He just got it rolling. He's got to keep it going, though. And it just starts an interesting discussion, because now all of a sudden it's like, oh, the Kings actually have more riches than you thought. Because when we were talking about Davion Mitchell getting traded, it's like, what do the Kings have like going forward? That's like that's a lottery pick. That's a first round pick that seemed to be getting shipped off. And now he's looking like he can be a pretty big rotational impact guy.
Yeah.
It's a completely different and better viewpoint of maybe a guy like Monty McNair, but just try to keep it on Davion Mitchell, I guess.
I mean, like a couple weeks ago, one of the main points of the podcast was Chris Duarte. Is he going to be the X factor going forward? And I mean, now I feel like you just replace all that with Davion Mitchell instead. I mean, Duarte hasn't even played the last couple games. I mean, if he can keep this up, I worry about it because his consistency shooting the 3 has been very flimsy in his NBA career so far. But I mean, the season's only about a month longer. If he can keep shooting like this for a month or 2 more into the playoffs, he's going to be a big X factor for them.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of looking at Keon Ellis, I mean, talking about Keon Ellis, I personally almost want to bring up another guy. Because Keon's obviously been terrific, and Fox reiterated what he said earlier this season, which is like, he's a playmaker defensively. And I think multiple people have said good things happen when he's on the floor. And that just is the case. And he's just been a solid 3-point shooter. Everybody has noted how great of a 3-point shooter he is. You see it in the G League. You've seen it in summer leagues and stuff like that. He's going to be able to do a lot. And he's doing a lot for the team now. And you mentioned it a few minutes ago that Huerter's been losing a lot of minutes. I think prior to the Houston game, I think he only played like a minute total in the prior 2 fourth quarters against the Lakers and the Spurs. And, that kind of points to the lower minutes overall for Huerter on the season since the All-Star break, sub 25 minutes a game. And he's shooting 32.6% from 3 since the All-Star break, about 41% from the field. His turnovers are up, as we mentioned last week. He's been solid at times defensively. He seems to be pretty effective in his own defense, or at least somewhat okay. And he's obviously been rebounding pretty well all season. But, sometimes you wonder about Huerter. He's going out there and just missing shots, or if he's not shooting, it's like, is he making the best impact elsewhere? And you start hearing things like, well, when Keon's out there, things happen. He's a playmaker defensively. And if Huerter's just going to be this guy that's not really going to make the effect offensively, and you need someone that's going to make things happen and be maybe a playmaker defensively, shouldn't you just start Keon Ellis? I mean, is that a serious discussion right now, or is that too crazy because of value of a guy?
I mean, I don't know. It is weird to say, but I mean, if come like the playoffs and you want to win, I mean, I feel like it needs to be a serious discussion. Again, I mean, Ellis is more of a shooting guard than a point guard at the same time. Seems to be playing better than Huerter right now. I think it should be more of a serious discussion. I don't know if it'll happen, though. Especially if you try to trade Huerter in the offseason, it's really going to decline his value. Especially in a year we say the Kings aren't going to go all the way. But I don't know. Maybe next season, maybe not. Maybe there's like just get rid of Huerter and maybe get something else, and maybe not necessarily get that shooting guard back because they really think they have something in Keon. And I mean, just watching him, it seems like they do. He just fits in with that lineup very well.
Yeah, guards the point of attack, all that. It's big. And I do think that they envision a world, they have to be at least considering it as an option, and one that they can kind of believe in just based on his play all season whenever he's had an opportunity, that Keon Ellis can start at the 2 guard next season. But the value factor comes in for Huerter, especially when you do, talk about the assessment of a team in the grand scheme of the league. It's like, can they really compete for a championship this season? You kind of have to think about value and stuff like that. And also it's like, Monty McNair's sitting there going, man, if that value goes down and we can't do anything with Huerter, that's going to make this whole trade with Atlanta thing seem really bad. Even though, you can make an argument that Huerter was a guy that kind of led a charge that changed the way the Kings stood among the league in 3-point shooting and everything like that last season. But ultimately, that wasn't the greatest move, especially considering you're not going to have a first-round pick this year. Mm-hmm. So how much does that factor into it? But you can't get too caught on that because of everything else we just laid out. But Keon Ellis is playing in such a way that you have to think about him in a way that, it's crazy to think he was a two-way player. So he was a two-way player, and now we're like, this guy should be starting. And you mentioned it last week. You're like, whenever he's out there, you kind of said the same thing that the players have been saying. It's like, good things happen when he's out there. That just seems to be the common theme with him. Mm-hmm. And it just seems silly to deprive the whole squad of that impact out of the gate because it seemed like it would be big. And Mike Brown always says all the time, Keon Ellis is 4-0 as a starter. So, hey, I don't know. I know there was a game recently. Was it did he start in Minnesota?
Yes, he did.
And he came out and he made an impact right out of the gate defensively. So, I don't know, man. He just seems kind of like he would be worth putting in. He really seems like one of the top eight players on the team, mm-hmm. which is hardcore rotational guy, in my opinion. He's been really good. And I just think he if they were going to go for a championship this season, if they were really all in on that, and I'm not sure they are, especially with the sort of losses they've had throughout the year, just kind of the lack of, I don't know. Anything can happen in the playoffs, but it is what it is. I think if they were really, really going for it, they would be starting Keon. And maybe that's evidence of just everything we've been saying already.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just too late. And like you were saying about the Huerter deal, if you're not able to trade him for a decent return, that's going to be one of the biggest, what do they call them? Like marks on Monty's personal record for the Kings. But the argument can be
record.
I don't know. What do they call it?
His permanent record. His report card on his. Don't you remember? There was always a thing about yeah, it's going on your permanent record, young man, and TV and movies and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Never heard about that.
I don't even know what permanent record is. Dude, it's permanent.
It's bro, you sound like you got.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
he does it. Yeah,
go ahead.
There you go.
Say something else.
I wasn't gonna say anything.
Good to know.
Nothing important.
Good to know you were just gonna fill airtime. I love that.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was gonna do.
You got it's the nature of the business, but
we're podcasters.
That's right, dude. I'm a professional podcaster, actually,
dude.
But speaking of Keon and Davion, he's not in the same group as them right now, but he seems like the type of guy that is in line to be in that type of group. Is Colby Jones, who's been playing a lot with Stockton this season, been assigned to the Stockton Kings for several games. And last week, he made pretty significant news among the Kings organization because he scored 43 points in a game against the Mexico City Capitans and scored 43 points on 16 of 21 from the field, including 8 of 12 from deep. Just absolutely got hot, especially late in the game, it seemed like, from three-point land. Had 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 steals, and a block. So was doing everything. And, he just looked confident, shooting threes off of movement and in transition, using his floater, his smooth kind of dribble and change of pace and deceleration and acceleration. He's not like an explosive player, but he shifts speeds very well, and he's very smooth the way he is. It's very different from anything that the Kings have, it seems like, but he's almost kind of got a driving style of Harrison Barnes, but in a guard form. And it was just a terrific floater, obviously, and he was really good getting the finger roll to go, and he just looked aggressive. And, it just kind of makes you think about that kind of developmental situation. And Colby Jones making his mark, not maybe at the NBA level, like maybe we could have thought that he was going to do with the summer league and the preseason he had, but still, here in March, showing him almost a full season of development with this Sacramento and the Stockton team. How do you feel about Colby Jones? I know we don't talk about him a lot, and maybe that's for good reason at this point in time. But where do you see Colby Jones at, and are you looking at him to be a contributor next season in a guard rotation?
For a long time, I was like, I don't care about second round picks. I don't care about G League players. There's a G League for a reason. For these guys to, rot away down there, if you want to use the word rot, if I do. It's a little rough. Because they are, phenomenal basketball players. But, it was extremely rare. I mean, even when it was the D League, right? I mean, developmental, that just seemed kind of, leave development to baseball, right? There are minor leagues in basketball. It was rare. I mean, how many guys, you're seeing it more nowadays, but for a long time it was, a lot of these guys in the G League never really made it into the NBA as good players. But I mean, the Kings over even just the last couple of years. I mean, Keon Ellis. I mean, Kessler Edwards hasn't spent too much time in the G League, or maybe he has. I really don't really know what Kessler Edwards is up to nowadays.
He's been assigned a few times lately, down there, and he's played a little bit with them.
And I know we haven't seen a lot of him. But I mean, that's another guy. It seems like he can have a rotational spot on this team in a year or two. And now you got a guy like Colby Jones, and it seems like the Kings got some guys in the pipeline, and it seems a lot more believable nowadays. It seems like the G League has maybe stepped up their game, or at least the Kings have stepped up their developmental game. So yeah, I'm excited. I mean, especially after seeing Keon. I really didn't think Keon would amount to much. But I mean, we just spent the last 10 minutes talking about how important he is and if he should be a starter. So I mean, I'm trusting this Kings development. I think Colby Jones has the potential to be a good player in this league, and a guy who can contribute on the Kings possibly next year. I mean, we're just talking about Malik Monk maybe not being re-signed, depending on that situation. I'm not saying Colby Jones will come in and take over that Malik Monk role, but I mean, you'll need another shooting guard. Maybe him and Keon will be the shooting guards of the future if they get rid of Herter and Monk walk. So we'll see. I have high hopes. I don't have MVP hopes or all-star hopes for this guy, but I mean, I think he can be a rotational piece on this team. And a lot of that is said to the way the Kings have been developing players over the last couple of years.
I think that's the key. I mean, I think the NBA has done a lot to kind of open up that developmental aspect of things with the expansion of two-way contracts and just the ability to kind of have guys go in between, like Colby Jones and Kessler Edwards. And, the Kings are taking advantage of that. I don't know. I guess I can't really compare it to the rest of the league, but, you see these second round interesting players. Colby Jones was an early second round pick. He's interesting. Like a guy like Ben Shepherd with Boston, or Chris Livingston with the Bucks. These kind of defensive sort of prospects, these interesting prospects that are not quite first round talent, but it's man, these guys have a lot of great qualities that, are typically the ones that actually get guys to float to the top. If they could just get an opportunity to develop in a way that's maybe a little bit more akin to baseball, that could do wonders for them. And I wouldn't be surprised if 2 out of 3 of those guys are impact players. And I think Colby Jones has a really good chance of doing that. And I've always liked his game. I think one of the things that he's terrific at is just he's a lot like Keon Ellis in the way that he can navigate through screens as a defender. And I just think he's not like Malik Monk in that he can get downhill or anything like that, but he's great at probing. And I feel like he can almost kind of be just a type of guy that, like I said, kind of probes into the lane and can pass a little bit like a good guard. Maybe not as well as Monk. Monk is such a great facilitator, but maybe develop into something that's close to that. But he's just got this really nice knack for being smooth and being able to accelerate and decelerate. And I think he can make a lot of good decisions with that skill set. So, I mean, I can see him being a pretty big part of this team. I mean, granted, he keeps going the right way, but yeah, he's got all the tools to be a rotational impact player for this team in the near future. And I think that the Kings are just, with Colby, with Kessler Edwards, obviously with Keon, like you said, I mean, we mentioned it, I think, last month. It's this organization's done a terrific job in terms of the developmental game.
Mm-hmm.
So just off of talking about the Herter trade, it's well, Monty McNair and company are also doing such a great job of doing things that seem to make up for that. I mean, like we're talking about, oh, well, McNair messed up with that Herder trade. Well, he also was responsible for signing Keon Ellis and drafting Colby Jones, and getting Kessler Edwards for nothing. So it's not like he's just sitting there on his, with his in his hand. He's actually doing stuff that, can mitigate something not working out like a Herder trade. So props to him. Props to the front office there.
Good job, Monte
Ellis.
So back to Monte McNair. Switching gears up a little.
Yeah.
Otto Porter Jr. was released by the Jazz today. Yeah. Otto Porter Jr. was released.
I love that name, Otto.
You kind of do too.
There's this guy, I used to work at this restaurant that was like a restaurant bar. And there's this guy that would order to go for like his wife and kid, even though he's like old as hell. This old guy balding with a ponytail and a beard. His name was Otto. And he'd always have like a beer or two or three while he waited. He was like the coolest guy. Kind of smelled bad, but it was really nice. Otto. My name's Otto.
If you're listening out there, Otto, why don't you drop a subscribe after hearing that?
That was a while ago. He wasn't looking too good then. I'm not sure where he's at now.
Jeez.
But yeah, speaking of that, Keegan Murray, the first 4 games out of the All-Star break. No, just to get it out of the way, Keegan Murray defensively is making an impact still. But offensively, which is the area of the floor the area of the game that we thought he'd make the biggest strides in. Granted, that doesn't take anything away from what he did defensively, which is exceeded expectations. Offensively, first 4 games out of the All-Star break, we thought he was getting into that rhythm. He was scoring 19 points per game, 56% from 3, 55.8% from the field. He looked like he was just decisive. He looked nimble. He looked quick. He looked aggressive. But in the previous 5 games, he's scoring 10.2 points per game, shooting under 40% from the field, and only hitting 18.2% of his 3-point looks in that time frame. And there's been some moments that you've kind of seen all season where he's dribbling a lot and kind of not really doing anything. He's getting blocked. I think he got like bailed out one time against the Rockets on like a 3-point attempt. I think that one of the Thompson twins fouled him, whichever one's on the Rockets.
I know. I think it's Amen.
Just got completely bailed out.
Amen or Amen?
Yeah. Yeah. And he was just dribbling around. It was just this terrible thing, but he got totally bailed out by an even more boneheaded foul. And it was just like, man, that could have been such a highlight, like a negative highlight play for Murray's offensive game this season. But I mean, like, have you seen any improvement, do you think, in his offensive game? And do you think he has one more big adjustment in him? We've seen so many adjustments throughout his rookie season, and even a little bit throughout this season. But like, do you think he can close the season out strong? Do you think he can go into the playoffs and kind of do what he did last year, which was finish off very nicely in a way that he can build momentum going into the next year? Do you see that happening offensively? Defensively is going to be fine, I think. Just strictly talking about his offensive game.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he can. I think Keegan Murray, I mean, just like looking at him, he's like the Kings. He's like a good metaphor for how the Kings are this year. Just inconsistent, especially on the offensive end. Like you said, defense has been great, but his offense, almost like Malik Monk last year. It's like some games he's great, and some games it's like, where are you? I just think that's being a sophomore, being in that sophomore year. He's going through these sophomore slumps, kind of like hills or peaks and valleys, as they say. He's in one of those valleys right now. But I think he'll have another peak. But then maybe, I don't know, it's still a month left of the season. He seems to have these like 8-game stretches, it seems like, where it's like he's at that peak for 8 games and he's in a valley for 8. So, I mean, we might see him go on that another peak of valley, then a peak again. I've just said peak and valley like way too many times in the last 30 seconds, but I hope that kind of just illustrates my point. Like, he's going to finish it off decent, but he might slump again. But just, I don't know. I think next year, I guess, is my point, is hopefully he'll be more consistent going into next season. He'll be that third year. I mean, that's what we've been saying. Wait for Keegan in his third year. That's when the Kings' championship window will really open up, because you're hoping he's going to be more consistent and playing at the level of Fox's and Sabonis's consistency, at least, at his level of play. So, I don't know. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but
I think it does.
I think
to keep it to symbols, metaphors, and imagery, Keegan Murray picked up one shoelace in his rookie season. That was the offensive end of the floor. And he picked up the other shoelace this season with the defensive end of the floor. Next year, he's got to start tying that together. But it begins with what he does to close this year and going into the playoffs. I think that's critical because he gave himself a massive boost with the way he closed that Golden State series. He ended up being one of the biggest assets in a series that, had the Kings kind of having to make adjustments and play, in a way that they weren't used to because Sabonis was being bothered. Herter and Barnes were non-existent. And Keegan Murray stepped up to the plate and made that adjustment. I think that'll be critical going into year 3 because he does have to tie it all together.
Yeah. And hopefully, I think I remember CJ McCollum, whenever this was. It was I think it was the end of his sophomore year. He had a great playoff series. I don't even know who it was against. And he wasn't a star player yet. I remember people saw him perform in the playoffs and they're like, this guy's going to be really good. And then sure enough, after that, I don't know if CJ's ever been an all-star. But we've all known CJ McCollum, a great scorer in the league. And maybe that's what this playoff series can do for Keegan if they, I think they'll at least make a play-in tournament. I think it can really set him up for success next season if he can perform well in the playoffs. I feel like it's just a big confidence booster. If you perform well in the playoffs, you can perform well in the regular season. So, hopefully he can do that, just kind of like CJ McCollum did. I don't even know how long ago that was now, 15 years ago. Has he been in the league that long? Is that excessive? Mm-hmm. Maybe 13 years ago. I really don't. No, it was probably 10. In that range. It was 14 or 15. It probably wasn't that long. That's more like Lillard. I think Lillard didn't get drafted till 13, and McCollum was after him. So that's a little.
Is that it? Really?
Yeah. Damn. So I don't know. I just kind of popped in my head right now. So hopefully that'll
that's good. That's a good comparison. It's just like you said. It's with Murray. It's just you just got to balance out those both ends of the floor, and then all of a sudden he's all-star level 2-way player in a year or two.
Yeah.
He just needs to balance it out and get back to shooting closer to 40% from 3. I think on the whole, since the All-Star break, granted, again splitting it between the 4 and 5 games, he's shooting 36%, which is above his season average, I think. So, and he was shooting, again, really well right out of the All-Star break, which does lead you to believe that it's he just needs to kind of grow in terms of being able to sustain the workload of being such a great defensive player while also being the offensive player that you saw a lot last season and that you've seen not a lot, but at times this season. So it'll be interesting. And I think Keegan Murray is worth keeping an eye on because sometimes he's kind of flying under the radar, it seems like.
Yeah.
Last few weeks.
He hasn't played well the last few games for sure. Easy to overlook him.
Yeah.
But like I said, he's a sophomore. That's kind of what we were expecting all season. He has shown improvements in his offensive game. And at some points of the season, if he can play at that level, next season, when he was at those peaks, as I've said, Kings are going to look like a very dangerous team.
Peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys.
Peaks and valleys, baby. Let's go.
What do they got? They got Milwaukee and the Lakers again?
They got Milwaukee and Lakers back-to-back, and then they play Saturday against the Knicks. We played the Knicks this year?
New York. Yeah. No. Because I think they play the Knicks on that East Coast trip in April.
Nice. Yeah. Well,
it's cool.
Bucks. They could have beat the Bucks last time. Lakers have a chance to sweep the season series against them. Sabonis can improve his record to 10-0 against Anthony Davis if Anthony Davis plays, which I'm pretty sure he's slated to.
Isn't that so interesting? They have these games like the Houston game and even the San Antonio game. It's we don't even get to talk about the Lakers game really.
Yeah,
they played so well in that. Came back from 22 down or whatever.
Yeah, that was so weird. I don't know if it was 22. I think it was 17 in the first quarter. And then they went there was some run they went on. I wish I knew the exact number, but they went on a 39-5 run or something. Geez.
Yeah.
That game was a blowout. Fox really blew up that game. I think that's where Mitchell, like we said, hit 4 threes. It was just a blowout. They played the Lakers really well. Ago. I know. I think it's a week apart, really, the two games. I think it was Wednesday when they played. I think they play on ESPN as well. So that'll be, I don't know. I don't know who the announcers are this time, but they do play on ESPN against the Lakers on Wednesday. So I'll be, I don't know, sometimes having I get it. Sometimes the national broadcast is terrible. But I do like having the coverage, and it is a little different and a little fun sometimes having a nationally televised game. So I'm looking forward to it at least.
I feel like playing the Lakers on national TV is worth it because, like, think about how many people want to watch LeBron. And you're just
That's true.
The Kings.
Yeah.
That's the time where you want to show up because it's like when the Kings play, like, I don't know. Remember when they had the Kings scheduled to play like the Rockets on national TV last season?
Yeah.
Didn't end up happening, but they had them scheduled. It's just like, who scheduled that? Like, put at least one team that you really have full belief in.
Yeah.
Silly.
This is definitely weird.
But I think what they do that for is because they make it so that they give it an ESPN game and that they don't do like local market coverage at that time. And then it makes it, they just drive up the revenue and the viewership that way because you have to watch it on ESPN. Because I feel like the most like watched game on ESPN was like the Knicks and Kings last season because of that.
Really?
Because so many people in like New York had to watch it on ESPN. They couldn't watch it on whatever. It was probably on Yes Network or something. I think that I might be making that up 100%, but I also might be telling the truth 100%. It's either or. It's one of the two. I don't know. I feel like I read stuff and sometimes I dream stuff. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, I'm going to ask you just like I did last week. Probably about, I don't know. I don't know if they play on Monday.
Yeah, they play Memphis on Monday.
Okay, Memphis Monday. So we probably won't talk till Tuesday or Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So 4 games. Give me a record. What do you think they're going?
Okay, I don't see them beating Milwaukee.
I don't either.
Are they going to beat the Lakers?
I think so.
I think so too. The Knicks are interesting. What are the Knicks doing lately? Because I feel like they'll beat Memphis. So I got them at 2-1 for 3 of the games.
You know, what Memphis is doing. The Knicks
or not
are just
Memphis, but
let me type it. I was like my favorite NBA standings. Let's see what the Knicks are. They're 37-27, fourth, but they're 4-6 in their last 10, which is worth noting. I think they lose to the Knicks.
They're not bad on the road though. I want to know what their schedule is going to be like. Are they? Because the Kings are going to have 2 days off before that.
That's true.
Okay, so the Knicks will have a day off. They'll be playing in Portland Thursday, and then they play in Sacramento on Saturday. Part of a West Coast trip for the Knicks is they're going to play the Trailblazers, Gigs, Warriors. Then they're going to go out to Denver. Then they'll go back home. All right,
I'm going 2-2.
I'm gonna go optimistic. I'm gonna go 3-1.
Okay, I hope so.
I'm gonna say they lose to Milwaukee and then win 3 straight to close out the homestand.
You know what? I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna say 2-2.
Nope.
Lost to the Grizzlies.
Nope. It's done. You gave your final answer.
I said 2-2, but now I'm thinking. Now I think the team they should beat in the Grizzlies, they're going to lose to them because that's the Kings. I'm just saying. All right.
Okay. All right. Fair. All right. We'll put that in the record.
They'll beat the Knicks. No, but they'll beat the Bucks.
Okay.
They're going to win 2 straight and then lose 2 straight. Yeah. They're going to beat the Bucks. They're going to beat the Lakers. Then they're going to lose to the Knicks and Grizzlies. That's my final answer. Final. I'm done. Locked it in. It's done.
That's it. Hey, I want to say one thing before we sign off.
Yeah.
So someone had on the show Girls the other day. You know, that Lena Dunham show. I don't know if anybody knows who Lena Dunham is.
I don't.
I was looking at Lena Dunham, and Lena Dunham. Look up Lena Dunham. Look at her eyes, and tell me she doesn't like have the same stare as Kevin Huerter. I think Lena Dunham and Kevin Huerter look like they could be brother and sister. So that's a little bit of homework for everybody at home.
I can see it.
I was not so I just want to be clear. I was not watching the show, and I would never willingly put that show on. I would never do that, but it was on the television.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
I said that looks like Kevin Huerter.
Yeah, sure. Oh. It does though. I can see it. But all right,
you see it though. It's like that stare.
Yeah,
it's that weird kind of like.
Yeah.
She looks like she just got a foul called on her. She can't believe it.
Yeah, it's that like 999 yard stare.
The Thousand Island stare.
All right. Well, you know what? That's. I'm not even giving you another chance to wrap it up. That was your one chance. You get it. So as always, I want to thank you for tuning in. And until next one, son of a gun. As always, I want to thank you for tuning in. And until next time, have a good one.